I started playing golf when I was 8 years old, and that's where my dad and I spent all our time together. I had some success as a junior, had won a lot of tournaments in Southern California, and I qualified for the National Junior when I was 13 years old. And I was a low qualifier when I was 13, and Dad said, "You're not going." "Well, what are you talking about? I'm not going." "No," he says, "you can't win. You're too young." So I didn't go. And the week of the tournament that it would have been played, I was sick in bed, and it's the only time in my whole life I was sick in bed. I had strep throat. And then I didn't qualify for 2 more years. So I qualified when I was 16, and I went back, and I was lucky enough to win.
Now, is it true that around that age you shot a 64?
When I was 13.
Hey Team MSE, so that's a little bit of footage from my feature documentary, Looking for Mr. Hogan, where I got to work with my wonderful swing teacher, Greg McCatton. God, I love the guy so much, and he knows so much about Ben Hogan. We just had a blast. But it's pretty cool because what we were working on, Greg really helped me at a crucial point because I've been having a little bit of trouble with my golf swing. You know, it's not uncommon from time to time that anybody's swing will go off the rails a little bit. And one thing that I've grown very pleased with is my ability to rebound. Today, when my swing goes off the tracks, I have a checklist of things that I go through to get it back on track. And this is something that doesn't happen overnight. This is one of those things that takes a long time to kind of build and go through, and you have to find it each time. And each time, I believe it gets a little bit easier. It's kind of like this. Imagine that at the top of a mountaintop is the great golf swing, pure ball striking. And say you're Indiana Jones in the Peruvian jungle, and you're trying to make your way up to the mountaintop, you know, and there's rivers and streams and vines and dangers all the way there. But the first time, it takes you forever to get to the top of the mountaintop. The second time, you're trying to work your way up there, and you know, you remember, oh, I think I turned right at this boulder. And then you see the stream, and it's like, oh, I remember this stream. And then you get there a little bit quicker. Well, each time you climb the mountain, it gets a little bit easier because you remember the landmarks and what happened the time before when you tried to do it. So now that I've built a swing from scratch, I know all the moving parts. It's like putting together my Porsche or something like that. And it's pretty remarkable because when my swing goes off the rails, I feel all the desperation and anxiety that I felt 5 or 6 years ago. Except the difference is I've got a great toolkit to fix it. Now, what I want to talk about is I went to the range the other day and I started putting all the pieces back together. And it's kind of funny because what I want to talk about is the order of the drills that I use to get my swing back. And my buddy AJ, it's so funny, when I told him I was having some swing troubles, he said, better watch the Hogan Code. And I literally haven't seen it in probably 4 or 5 months. And I was in my room, pulled up my laptop, and I started watching it, and I didn't stop watching it. I watched all 1 hour and 41 minutes of it. It truly is one of the most unique swing instructional videos ever made. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not bragging, it's just fact. It's like, it's different. I'm a filmmaker. If there's anything I've done competently in my life, it's be a TV and film producer and director. My shows have won an Emmy, a Peabody. I've won a Best Director Award at an international film festival. So that's the one thing that I feel very comfortable with. But I made a great swing documentary, you know, and swing instructional. So if you haven't seen it, if you want to help me make my movie, get the Hogan Code. And I say the reason you should get it is because it's going to help you be a better golfer. So at any rate, I was going through the Hogan Code, and I started going through loading my hips. I started going through the sit move. I started going through the squeeze pivot, and I started working on the wheelhouse. And the next thing you know, I got my swing back up and running. So I took some video of me working on the range, and I'll kind of talk you through what I was doing while I was doing these little micro moves and and getting all the sequencing back so that my arms don't fire too early and I go back to my early extension. As golfers, we're always going to fight these El Guapos that we have, you know. So what I always try and do is keep in mind that I know what I've done wrong in the past and how I've fixed it. So if you've rebuilt your swing, then it's a lot easier to fix it when it goes wrong than if you're a natural and it just goes off the rails. All right, guys, so here we are. I'm out at the range. I'm just going to be hitting wedges and making sure my sequencing is correct. So here what I'm doing is I'm making sure I get my bump to the left because our hips are going to pivot together with our torso once we hit that Shangri-La position. So as we look at this, I'm going to go through it in slow motion here. I get my weight back into my right heel. I pivot around that right leg like it's a post. And then I keep my head back behind the ball as I make that bump to the left with my hips. Now, once that club gets into Shangri-La, then we're going to begin to fire and turn and rotate everything through. This is the wheelhouse concept that I have talked about a great deal. So now if we look down the line, I'm trying to find that Shangri-La position, and then that's where everything's going to fire together. And you'll notice how nicely the hips clear. There's plenty of time to clear the hips. I was always trying to clear my hips too early. The classic spin out move that you hear people talk about. You can see it right there. Look at how much turn I can get even though I'm starting once I hit Shangri-La with my pivot. So this is a pretty important concept that took me a while to really get down, and this is one of the first things I want to check. And here you can see it's very important to just let the arms come along for the ride. You can see that the hips clear and the club is going to fly around the center of gravity. Now, one of the next things I always want to check is my posture. I've been getting a little slumpy, a little crouched down and squished up where I have a lot of slack in my swing. But you'll see that I'm referencing keeping my chin lifted and giving myself plenty of space for my shoulders and hips to rotate around my spine. A lot of times I'll get a lot of slack in my swing and I'll start to crouch down. So it's very important that I remind myself to keep my structure in place. This is going to help me to be able to release the club freely and find impact squarely without having to get all squished up, so to speak. Here I'm finding that nice plane at the top of the swing. And when you're doing slow motion swings, it's very important because it helps you to get the feel, but the look of the swing isn't going to be even close to a full speed swing. But here I'm really working on deepening those hips. And I'm going to pull the club down into the Shangri-La position. Here I'm square to the ball. And I want to feel that left hip get deep and out of the way before I release that club head. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this all back together. I'm going to try and make sure my posture is nice. I'm going to make sure I stay in that deep sit move. And when I get to the wheelhouse, I'm going to fire everything together. And the club's going to go right around my body. Now, one of the things that I've always had a problem with, this is my El Guapo, is my hit impulse with my arms. When I get frustrated, I start throwing my arms at the ball a lot more. But I want to remember to keep my arms loose and soft like they're long ropes connected to the club head. And here we go. Nice impact with this wedge. Everything just seemed to be much more effortless once I started to get everything back in order. So let's take a look at this swing again. So here we are. Halfway back, finding the plane. Then we have the first compression move at the top of the swing. And then what we're going to see is a second lowering. I'm going to get into that Shangri-La position. And this is when you're in the wheelhouse. You can see my left wrist is starting to get bowed. That toe is turned down to the ball. Now this is where the pivot happens. And we can see that my hips have cleared around to the left. I've made solid impact, and that club is just tearing through the ground. And it's effortless. I'm not swinging hard with my arms and hands. You know, one of the things that Greg told me is, if it feels fast, it's not fast. Because what makes it feel fast is the little muscles are firing. But what we want are the big muscles of the body to control the swing and whip that club around our body. So once again, what I'm trying to do is get this club loaded. Here we see that nice Shangri-La position. The knees and hips are square to the ball, but the shoulders still have a ways to go. But everything's going to catch up right through impact. Now we've got that nice clearing. There's plenty of room for my arms and hands to fire. And we have a nice solid impact, and that pulls my body up into the upright position. So those are the things that I were working on that really helped me out a ton, an absolute ton. And I hope this helps you to understand how I've rebuilt my swing and how I can go back to my toolbox if anything ever goes wrong. And right now I'm really excited about the way that I'm hitting the ball. And my future videos that are coming up, I'm going to talk about some more swing keys that, you know, I've kind of touched on them in the past, but you can't forget them. They're so important. And once these things become ingrained, then we can all play a lot more fun golf. So hit them long and hit them straight.